With a show as violent as Invincible, it's no surprise that there's a ton of character deaths. With some being insanely more depressing than others, these are all the characters who've died in the show so far. First off, we have Andresa. Andresa was Oliver's biological mother, married to Omni-Man. She was, well, a bug. Mark kept her safely throughout the attacks of the Viltrumites, and finally, they left, after capturing Omni-Man. Mark was about to leave, just as she gave Mark Oliver, telling him to take care of his baby brother. Thraxans don't live for very long. Their lifespans is just about as long as an Earth year, so not long after Mark left with Oliver, she passed away to old age. While her death wasn't very impactful, seeing as she died pretty normally for her species, Angstrom Jr.'s death was a lot worse. In an alternate universe, one of Angstrom's levies had a son. This son was brutally murdered by sinister Invincible, along with his father, Angstrom Levy. It doesn't take much to realize that this death has a huge impact, with it simply adding on to the reason Angstrom Levy hates Invincible. But most like Invincible, Omni-Man was just being hated by everyone, not only for his actions against Mark, but when he took down the Guardians, clubbing Aquarius in the face, completely destroying it, murdering him on the spot. Out of nowhere, the Guardians saw Omni-Man's betrayal, and despite the King of Atlantis fighting his best, a fish is simply no match for a Viltrumite. While Omni-Man does deserve some of the hate, Invincible is simply trying to do good by the people of Earth, wanting to help them and make an actual difference to try and offset the damage of Omni-Man did. But for whatever reason, along with Angstrom Levy, Scott Duvall and Becky Duvall hated Mark's guts. But in Becky's case, she died because of her own hate for Mark, when she tied herself up while watching Powerplex or Scott fighting Mark, getting incinerated in the process. For whatever reason, after seeing the Powerplex's own powers cause the death of his wife, he decided to blame Mark for that too. Critical thinking seems to be a scarce resource in the Invincible universe. Just like in the case of Biplane, who was after being diagnosed with cancer, decided to strap a bunch of plutonium to himself, along with a pair of wings, planning to blow up the city and go out with a bang. Immortal, despite being pretty weak against literally everyone, did manage to fling the guy into space, where later on a trip to Mars, Invincible saw the poor guy's dead body frozen in the void. But he suffered near the same fate as British Knight, a British Knight who died during the Invincible War. He was a superhero who joined the GDA, living in the UK. Not much to say about him, he's just pretty chill, or was, until he died. Bulletproofable, much like a lot of the other Invincible variants, are dead. So let's just count all the variants now, and add them to the death counter, going through them rapid fire. To keep things simple, we're only going to show the confirmed deaths. Being trapped in Angstrom Levy's wasteland doesn't count. Who knows, they could have found a way to all survive there, right? First off, Bulletproofable died to Renaman in the Pentagon, having his neck snapped. Invincible, probably dead off screen, as well we see the heroes he is fighting appear later, alive. Flaxacinable. This variant was a lot weaker compared to the others, giving Donald and Cecil hope that the others may just be as weak, if not weaker. He was killed by the Renaman, paired with the high frequency tone that Viltrumites are vulnerable to. Goggles Invincible. This Invincible is the one who was taken down by a one-man army, that our Chlor's king, Rexlode. Rexlode managed to take this variant down solo, with his entire goddamn skeleton in the blaze of glory. Here Invincible was also off-screened. We see him put on a payroll and turn into a remnant later, along with a couple of other variants. Invincible. He's also taken down by a Renaman, but not before seriously wounding Eve, which causes Mark to start crying and look after her leg. Dude just wanted an excuse to sit this one out. Light Blue Invincible. We don't see how this variant dies, but we know he dies during the war, and it turns into a Renaman, Mustacheable. This variant fought against Tech Jacket and lost pathetically, as we see his dead body floating through space. Now that those are done, back to the list. We have Cruz Kaiju, the huge ugly green monster which Invincible and Andresa fought when she first came to Earth, using it to show off her insane abilities while Mark struggled. Darkwing, much like Aquarius, suffered a pretty gruesome death at the hands of Omni-Man. He was thrown into the ground by Omni-Man grabbing his ankle. Pretty gruesome death, and he was thrown into the hands of his teammate, Green Ghost, who died when Omni-Man put his fist through her head. Doug Cheston was one of those poor college kids who was experimented on by D.A. Sinclair. He went on a short rampage before offing himself in front of Invincible. The Flaxen leader, however, had more than a few runs in with Invincible. For Mark, they were like 5 minutes apart, but for the Flaxen leader, he kept on trying to invade Earth, when Omni-Man put a stop to it by entering their dimension and raised hell. He tortured the planet for decades before returning home, for Earth. Barely a week had passed. Force Fist was one of those villains Cecil fought during his past, and they were the ones who made him who he is today. They were put on the paywall by the GDA director at the time, but similar to Mark, Cecil couldn't take it and put a bullet through him and through Knucklebuster, Force Fist's sidekick. Gretchen Duvall was Scott Duvall's niece, though she died quickly during the fallout between Invincible and Omni-Man with her mother, Jessica Duvall, who was Scott Duvall's sister. It was enough to turn Scott Duvall into a maniac, blaming Invincible for literally everything. I wouldn't be surprised if he blamed Invincible for getting a lower tax return at this point. The Iguana was part of the Lizard League. She wasn't actually an iguana, who would have guessed? But she died alongside the Lizard League, when our glorious King Rexlode murdered them all with a bullet into the head. King Lizard suffered a worse fate, but definitely deserved it after shooting Rexlode. He hit a headshot but still ended up missing and dying. Pretty terrible villain. Jack Duvall was Powerplex's son, who was turned into ashes after Powerplex crashed out. It was pretty jarring, honestly, not much else to say. Omni-Man, who was part of the Guardians, who were brutally murdered by Omni-Man when he yanked his core out of his body, ending him instantly. The Muller Twins were a fan favorite. It was always some fun banter going on when they were on screen, but they have all changed when Oliver brutally ended them both. Honestly, they were pretty chill and stayed out of everyone's way, being somewhat anti-heroes we grew to love throughout the show. To see them die like that was pretty sad. Much like when Invincible was fighting his first few battles against the Flaxons, he saw one of the civilian casualties and got too attached, a woman named Maya. Seeing the real death and destruction these villains bring to the world is what made him who he is today, and so it's safe to say Maya's death was not in vain. Nolles was a Thraxan who was shapeshifted into Sean's dog, Mark's favorite cartoon, to lure Mark to Thraxa. Because of this, Mark was able to defend the Viltrum attack with Omni-Man and protect his brother. Unfortunately, during the battle, Nolles died off screen. Speaking of characters who died off screen, Oliver Grayson is next. You might be wondering, Oliver Grayson? He seems pretty alive. Except this is the original Oliver Grayson, Mark's grandfather and Debbie's father. This is who they name Oliver after. This allows Debbie's father to live on and ensure Oliver's carries a great legacy forward. Unfortunately for Red Rush, the same couldn't be done. His skull was literally crushed to death when he was betrayed by Omni-Man. He saw Omni-Man about to kill Immortal. Ironic, huh? And so Red Rush pushed Immortal out of the way, turning into Omni-Man's next target. He did a decent amount of damage, pummeling Omni-Man's chest, but it wasn't enough. While it wounded him severely, Omni-Man managed to overpower Red Rush and endure the beating long enough to squeeze his head like a cherry. Pretty gruesome stuff. But nothing even comes close to one of the worst and saddest deaths on the list. Our glorious king, Rexlode. Rexlode was finally making amends in his life. He had gotten close with Shrinking Ray and the two were starting a relationship together, one that actually meant something. Things were finally looking up for him as he made a great turn for the good. All this changed when the Invincible War broke out. He could have saved himself, and he had every chance to make it out alive, but he chose to die for his friends rather than live alone. Backed into a corner, he made one final move. His entire goddamn skeleton. He took out an Invincible variant all alone, doing more alone than 90% of the other characters could do with help. Truly one of the greatest superheroes of all time. Salamander was part of the Lizard League and ended up at the mercy of Shrinking Ray, who decided to put an end to his shenanigans during the break into the Pentagon when she shrank into his eyes, killing him. Shrapnel was a pretty low-key character who tried for the Guardians, but never made to the cut. Eventually, she died defending the planet during the Invincible War. Supreme Lizard died when he overthrown by King Lizard in the coup, being shot in the head. The Hunk was a hunk of a man. He applied to be part of the Guardians Globe, but didn't make the cut after Adam Eve beating him while sparring. Similar to Shrapnel, he was later found dead and beaten during the Invincible War. Immortal, unlike his name, was also killed. This happened in a future timeline, where he begged Mark to kill him. When Mark asked why he couldn't do it himself, he said that no real man goes out like that. I can't lie, when I think of Immortal, the last thing I think of him is being a real man. Vidor was a Viltrumite, and one of the Viltrumites who invaded Thraxa looking for Nolan. While the others managed to overpower Nolan, he made sure to get into a few hits of his own, murdering Vidor when he crushed his skull in. The same fate was met by the Viltrum Executioners. When Alan finally convinced Nolan to break out of prison, he killed the Executioners during the battle in a sick-ass team-up scene with Alan. It was pretty sad though, as one of them looked up to Nolan since he was a child. Another victim of Omni-Man was Warwoman, a member of the original Guardians. Omni-Man struggled a lot when fighting her, but finally managed to snap her neck and end her life permanently. Her body was mutilated after the battle. Zam was an American who devoted himself to Kahor, and when Kahor finally found a suitable male host, first, he thought he was free. This was until Invincible flew over his tomb site, causing a sandstorm that killed him. And that is every killed off character so far in the show. If you want more videos like this, make sure to comment down below, like, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you all later.